I'm Liz Larson.
And I'm Bill McKenna.
And together, we created the Cognomovement system. And we'd like to welcome you to the New Life Perspectives radio show,
where we're going to be sharing with you tools, tips, and ideas that are going to change your life.
Hello, hello, in UK Health Radio land. I'm Liz Larson, and I'm here with my friend,
Bill McKenna.
Hey, Bill McKenna. We just happen to be the hosts here of the UK Health Radio Network show, New Life Perspectives. And we're also the pair that created the Cognomovement system. It's our great honor today to welcome Dr. Paul Mills, PhD, from USC San Diego. Will you introduce us, Bill?
Oh my gosh. I'm so excited to have Paul here. Paul is a PhD, is a professor of public health and family medicine, director of the Center of Excellence for Research and Training in Integrative Health at the University of California, San Diego. He has over 400, let me repeat that, 400 scientific publications in the fields of pharmacology, oncology, cardiology, psychoimmunology, behavioral medicine, integrative health. His work has been featured in Time Magazine, New York Times, National Public Radio, U.S. News and World Report, Consumer Reports, Huffington Post, Gaia TV, WebMD, among many others. He's presented his works at hundreds of conferences and workshops around the world, including the United Nations. Wow, what an esteemed guest. Paul, welcome. And we are so excited to hear about your latest work.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate you inviting me onto your show.
We're so happy to have you because this is a really different conversation than we've had before. So we're so excited for our audience to get to hear about you because you blend science and spirituality. And I think this has been in the past a big clash. Spirituality and science did not seem to gel at all, all the way back to Galileo even. So you found a way to do that beautifully. So will you share with us, where in the world did this get started?
Thank you. Be happy to. For me, this movement of science and spirituality, trying to remove that gap between them, as we typically see, at least in Western society, for me, it began when I was young. I started to learn meditation when I was in high school. And within a few months of learning meditation, I had what is often called an out-of-body experience. I was sitting down outside under a tree meditating, and in a moment's time, I found myself up and above myself while I was meditating. And I could see the top of my head and the leaves in the ground and everything very clearly. Now, I had never heard that such an experience was even possible. I was raised Christian. I'd never heard of such a thing. But in a few moments, I settled into the experience. And I began to notice it was like there was two of me. There was me, Paul, who had learned meditation and was sitting there meditating. And then there was a much larger me, an expanded consciousness me that was very familiar. And I felt very much at peace with the experience. And after some moments, I was back in my body. And that really led me to become a scientist because I started having questions. I thought to myself, well, what just happened? Is this a common experience? Is it uncommon? Who's me? Is it the Paul me that I'm used to? Is it the expanded consciousness Paul me? I began to do a lot of reading, and that got me into questions of human potential. Well, if my consciousness has the potential to be expanded and I can perceive in a totally different way, I want to learn about it. And I want to dig into it deeply. And that's what led me to become a scientist.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah,
it's kind of funny because you say you're sitting under a tree meditating, and then you're outside your body, and that led you to be a scientist. Another person, it might have led them to be a priest. So share with us, with our audience, how did you make that fork in the road? Why not a priest? Why a scientist?
Yeah, thank you, Liz. That's a really insightful question, because I always had a spiritual inkling when I was young too, very much oriented towards, we would often say, more of a spiritual life, even a religious life. Although I didn't have the kind of experiences that was driving me that way, it was just a feeling. And really, when I began to move in the direction of becoming a scientist, I did wonder just what you said. Should I become a religious? But my decision-making kept me in the direction of science. Ultimately, I got my PhD in neuroscience. But the thing is, all along my career at the university, probably twice per year if I could make it, but certainly once a year, I would do extended retreats at monasteries. And they were monasteries near where I lived, or if I was traveling internationally to a conference, I would always seek out a monastery somewhere near where the conference was, usually out in the countryside. And I would add on a week after the conference, or sometimes a week before the conference. So I could spend some time cultivating that part of me that my scientific career certainly didn't cultivate. And in reality, I had to pretty much keep in the closet.
It's super interesting. So where did they begin to integrate for you? One had to be front and center, your scientific, educational, academic career. And the other, like you said, was closeted. So when did you start to pull them together in a functional way?
Yeah, because even though I had gotten into science because of those early meditative experiences and some experiences that came later, I was really doing very traditional scientific work, more of this biomedical model. Bill, you read some of those areas I've worked in. That's very traditional stuff. It was only the last approximately maybe 9 years of my career that I was able to get back to the meditation work, start doing research on energy medicine, consciousness. And that really resulted from a chance opportunity. I met Deepak Chopra at a small conference, and he and I started chatting. And we realized pretty quickly that we had some common interests and also common experience. I had learned transcendental meditation, which I mentioned earlier, in high school. Later, I got very deep into it. I went to Europe. I met the Maharishi. I became a teacher of transcendental meditation, really got in deep, as did Deepak. So we realized we had similar perspectives on the, let's say, the human consciousness development journey. And so we resonated in that. And then we also had interest in what was called integrative medicine or complementary medicine. So we had some conversations and realized, well, it's pretty good shape out there, some aspects of integrative medicine, but other aspects, no. We identified some areas that we could improve, let's say. We could do some research and try to advance the conversation. That's what we did. And that's how I got into it again.
Okay, so now we had even a third prong. So we have medicine, treating and healing for the body. We have the spirituality aspect, which is generally considered outside the body. And now you're bringing in consciousness, which in this crowd, we might say they're all very much the same, but consciousness for a lot of people is even a separate thing. So how are we talking about this moving forward? Consciousness, medicine, and spirituality. How is this new conversation happening?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question also, and there's an interesting history behind it. Back in the, let's say, the late 70s, at least in the West, this movement called complementary alternative medicine started. And that was an interest to begin to have people bring in modalities, mainly meditation at the time. And then, it evolved into acupuncture and energy medicine. And that's all been very good. And our center at the University of California, we have a center for integrative medicine. So patients who come into the normal biomedical system can also have exposure to those modalities. The problem is that this movement, what we call integrative medicine or integrative health, in the US and really beyond, at least in the whole academic setting, has been very fragmented. And that's what Deepak and I chatted about and identified. And what do I mean by fragmented? Well, the inspiration for integrative health, as we call it now, began from traditional medical systems. What are those? Ayurvedic medicine, Native American medicine, Tibetan medicine, certainly Chinese medicine, and others. Those systems all have these healing modalities that are commonly used in the West now, but they have more than that. And the more is they are all bundled together when they're prescribed. And all these systems have a deep understanding of the consciousness nature of the human being, of, let's say, the transcendent nature, let's say the metaphysical, even the mystical. So when we started our research together with the Chopra Foundation, we decided to pursue doing research on a traditional system, and we chose Ayurveda for several reasons. We couldn't help but land on the consciousness side of things once we started working with a traditional system, because that's their foundation. They know it implicitly. And that's what we're doing now. And that we've published papers in this area. I've given talks on it, trying to get this conversation started, saying we've done a pretty good job with integrative medicine, but we're missing a piece. We're missing this next step, threshold, which is the spiritual, which is what you're asking about. And then we can do more of this blending with the science and the medicine and the spiritual.
In this research you're doing, the typical allopathic doctors, there's a lot of pushback, it seems to me, on these alternative methods, even though they've been around for thousands and thousands of years. Is this changed, or is the environment much more open now at the university level for this stuff?
The answer is yes. There has been a gradual improvement over time. When I first started doing research back in the, let's say, in the mid 70s, and then I went to the university, I had some very senior faculty at the department that I was entering into at the time, because I had expressed an interest in meditation from my own experiences. And they said, there will be no meditation research in our department, period. So that was the typical mindset. But you're right, it's changed over time. That same department, which was psychiatry at the time, they now have one of the largest, most successful centers for mindfulness meditation in the United States. So the receptivity has grown. Meditation, let's face it, it's a household word now. And if you went on what's called pubmed.gov, that's hosted by the U.S. Library of Medicine, there's over 5,500 studies now on meditation. So there's a lot out there. But are there 5,500 studies or any studies on spirituality in medicine and the way we're speaking about, or the metaphysical in medicine? No. So we haven't gotten there yet, but we've gotten there with meditation, a fair amount of work with energy medicine, things like that.
So this is a super exciting conversation, especially for me, that, I really have always been raised in that healing oneself is full body, mind, body, spirit. And allopathic medicine, like you said, for most of the time that it's been in existence, really didn't like to bring in the rest. So let's take our break. And when we come back, we'll break that down. How is medicine now integrating it back in? So Ukhealthradio, let's hear from you. Take it away. Okay, and we're back with Dr. Paul Mills, and we're talking about a particularly exciting topic for me, and how Dr. Mills is bringing back in to healing some of these ideas like meditation, spirituality, and consciousness. And you said that you started the work in Ayurveda. So this is interesting because traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, does include some of these spiritual things like meditation. In Chinese medicine, they'll say there's 101 emotional reasons for every illness, that there are things that cause illness and also cure illness that are outside of things that we would traditionally call medicine. So when you and Dr. Chopra actually started to investigate this, how did you break it down? How did you separate things like herbs and diet from meditation?
So that was the key. We didn't. Well, let me put it this way. When we were starting our research together and we were wondering what direction to go, I mentioned PubMed a minute ago. So I went to PubMed, and at that time, say 8 years ago, I did a search meditation. And as I said, there were thousands of studies. And then I did a search on the word yoga, thousands of studies, acupuncture, thousands of studies, herbs, thousands of studies. But when I did a search with all those together, zero. And that's what we were trying to overcome. We decided, we realized there was this gap in the literature where nobody was doing research on the true integrated system itself. They were following the reductionistic model. Well, let's study this piece, let's study that piece, and so forth. And many of those studies show very good effects, as you would expect. But the question is, historically, they've always been, let's say, prescribed and practiced together. What happens when you do that? Presumably, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The concept of emergence, that more things are going to happen when you do that than doing it separately. So that's what we started doing. We put them together and we were getting fantastic results. And then we would submit it to a journal, or I would give a talk at a conference and people would say, well, but you didn't separate them out. And I would say, I don't care. I didn't want to. And it was a different mindset for people because of that reductionistic model. But the reductionistic model hurts us in many, many instances. And this, from my point of view, is one that needed to be changed.
Wow, that was a mountain to overcome right there, because all the papers are, how do you know what's effective and what's not effective if you haven't done the reductionistic model, right? So, wow, I mean, I'm sure you're gotten a lot of resistance and power to you on that for bringing it all together, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the defense probably is, if you want the components of, they could probably research just a particular component of and find the efficacy of the component. But you're showing the entire picture, right?
We were, and honestly, that's how we ultimately started going in more to the consciousness side of things, because we were doing these Ayurvedic interventions where it was an intensive retreat setting where they were doing all the practices at the same time, as would normally be done. And for a lot of my research, given my behavioral medicine interest, we were giving people questionnaires in addition to drawing blood and doing other physiological measures. The questionnaires were things on gratitude, depression, anxiety, self-compassion. We also had a questionnaire on this concept of non-dual awareness. And when we looked at that data from the study, all those showed improvements, showed changes, even though we didn't talk about that stuff in the study. They were just practicing meditation, doing yoga, eating their Ayurvedic diet, on and on and on. But they had these spontaneous changes in their consciousness, in their sense of self-compassion, less identification with the ego, with the mind and body as an identity, and more an identification with something beyond. And that, to me, again, is the wisdom of traditional systems. They innately support our inner life, our, let's say, if I can call it soul life, spiritual life, and it begins to turn those things on naturally. And that's what we started to see. And then we started to write about that more.
Well, this is what you would really call holistic medicine. And it's true. The true meaning of the word is that it takes into account the whole of a person, not just the whole body, but the whole of a person. And it really is a radical approach, because the scientific method would usually be each individual piece and which piece worked better. And the argument is, well, you don't know which one worked. And, maybe it's just the medication that you gave, or maybe it's just the meditation. And so it sounds like what you did is you're saying, no, it's all together. Like the sum is not the equivalent of its parts. There's a wholeness that gives it all much more power. So my mind goes to you did Ayurveda, studied Ayurveda. Did you have to teach people this Eastern philosophy? Did you have to teach them meditation? Did they have to understand, an Indian religion of some kind? How did you introduce it to people?
Yeah, we introduced it that we wanted them to be exposed to a whole system. We had an Ayurvedic physician who was a Western medical doctor, but also trained in Ayurveda, help with some of the enrollment. They had to do the diagnosis, if you're familiar with the doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, because we wanted them diet for the person, the proper oils for their Ayurvedic massage and so forth. And yes, they did have to be taught meditation. And the Chopra Center at the time used basically, it's like a mantra meditation, which is pretty common, very similar to transcendental meditation. But they didn't get information on religion, Hinduism, nothing like that. That wasn't part of it. It was more the, say, ways of living, new ways of living, taking care of yourself with diet and, sleep hygiene and so forth.
Did they basically control their diet? Like, here's your meals, here's your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and this is what you're getting. Mm-hmm. That's how it worked.
It did, yes. There were standard what are called Ayurvedic meals given during the retreat, and they're balanced. They were more vegetarian, but not always, and good oils, those sort of things.
The whole diet thing, from my studying with just a little toe into the Ayurvedic world, I love the way they put it, that all day long, 7 days a week, all of us around the world are sticking different things in our mouths, right? All day long. It's like a pipe that goes through us, and we are putting in, you name it, whatever it is, but we're just filling it up all, 3 times a day. And with that, all of these different foods have different energies. They support, or they, in certain cases, they will denigrate our health in different ways. And they know this about the different energies that the body has. So I find it really fascinating that you included that, and adjusting. That's the number one way that we can help our health, is what we're going to put or not put into our system. But you alluded earlier to something else, and that is an evolution in one's consciousness. Now, one of the, when I first heard the word consciousness, I didn't, it kind of like, what? I'm not sure what that means. And, I love the definition of consciousness, that the level of consciousness is simply the understanding that we've come to thus far in our lives. My understanding is I should be worried. I'm anxious. A lot of things to be anxious about, or, non-dualistic, oneness, that I now understand that I'm you. So, and all the different levels in between. But one of the things that I wanted to just ask about is what one eats. When you did this for people, you controlled their diet. Mm-hmm. Did that support their spiritual growth and their ability to see new perspectives, come to a new level of understanding?
That too, that's a great question, and a couple of answers. One, I can't fully answer that because we had everybody do all the things together, given it was a whole person medicine, let's say, intervention. But there is a lot of separate research on different types of diets that people consume. And some diets do naturally make people feel better, help them sleep better, feel a little more grounded, clearer mind, and so forth. And gets back to the whole person system, such as Ayurveda or Chinese medicine. I mentioned earlier the doshas. A lot of the traditional medical systems recognize there are differences amongst us. The Greeks called it the temperaments. There's these different fluids. There's different approaches to understanding it. But essentially, these ancient systems followed what in more modern times we started calling personalized medicine. Do you remember that term? It was really big maybe 10 years ago. It's kind of fallen away these days. Nowadays, it's everybody just gets the same thing, even if it's not going to be as effective for you or good for you and not good for you. It doesn't matter. Just take it. So this has changed for some reason, but traditional systems knew that I'm going to respond to a certain type of food differently than you, say, for example, Bill, or you, Liz. And even medicines. A lot of my hypertension work over the years, we were studying different types of antihypertensives. And just innately, men respond differently than women. Different racial groups will respond to, for example, a beta blocker. It'll be working really well in this person, but not in this person. This person will respond to a diuretic, but not this person, on and on. So personalized medicine is honestly the way to go. And traditional systems know this. And within that, if I'm a Vata person in Ayurveda, I will generally be advised to eat these sorts of foods. Don't go after these foods, just because it'll lead to an imbalance physically and eventually, let's say, psychically or emotionally.
Super interesting. I want to talk more about that when we get back from our break with Ukhealthradio. Take it away.
And we're back with Dr. Paul J. Mills. And we're talking about this idea that you can have holistic medicine and scientifically study it, the consciousness, the spirituality, and the medicine, the medication part of it, and include things like diet, exercise as well. That's a thing that Bill and I find in our work, that everybody who comes to us doesn't fit in a mold. The same thing doesn't work for each person. They don't respond. So when they walk through the door, it's really important to us that we let everything we think we know about them go and simply follow, in our case, their neurology. What is their particular body doing? Western medicine has not been good about this. Western medicine has been like, okay, if you have high blood pressure, here's a pill for everybody. Almost all age groups, men, women, children, not really for that. But so this really is a radical approach then. One, the idea that you may need something specific, food-wise. Then you add on the medicine-wise. Then there's another level of what kind of, do they need breath work? Do they need meditation? If they're going to do breath work, is it breath of fire or is it deep belly breath? So in your studies, how did you determine this? What did you do to give each person their prescription?
Yeah. As the study was gearing up to go, we had Ayurvedic physicians who know how to, let's say, categorize a person, or let's say diagnose a person. Am I a Vata? Am I a Pitta? Am I a Kapha? Oh, well, maybe I'm actually a Vata Pitta or a Kapha Vata. There's various combinations. And historically, in this system, that is done by checking the pulse. And the pulse provides deep insight into the autonomic nervous system, which is, you can determine, heart rate variability and things. And then those who are really good at checking the pulse can actually project their awareness into the body to get even more information. And based on that diagnosis, then they know, okay, this is the ideal diet for you. This is how much meditation to do. This is the kind of oils that you should be ingesting. This is the kind of oils we should use to rub on your skin while we're doing the Ayurvedic massages, and on and on. So that's how we did it for this particular study, which honestly is pretty traditional. If it was a Tibetan medicine study, they also would have taken the urine, and they're very keen on testing the urine. They look at it, they stir it around, they'll smell it, and the urine has lots of information on the state of health of the person, but also just getting back to this idea of the type they are, and then they know which type of herbs and medicines to prescribe.
So, what really came out of this that traditional doctors can use? Because, not every allopathic doctor is going to use Ayurveda or even breathwork or even meditation, but there had to have been pieces of it that more doctors could start to integrate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a couple of things. And I'd say most of the doctor side of things responded not so much to the data I shared with you earlier, such on more, they had a movement towards, let's say, non-dual awareness or more self-compassion and more gratitude. No, it was more from the physiological data we gathered in the blood data. We showed changes in epigenetic changes in their genes related to more rest and restoration of the body, and reduction of genes that sustain more of a stress response, sympathetic nervous system, for example. One of our investigators, Dr. Christine Peterson, she did a deep dive on a lot of the gut microbiome and was able to show shifts in the gut microbiome towards a more healthy state. And presumably that resulted more from the dietary changes. Maybe in the long term, changes in the meditation and the psyche would influence that too, given the link of the vagus nerve and all. So most of our keen interest came on the physician side from the biologic changes, because that's what they're looking at. They're typically looking at labs and what's this, this high, is this low, you're doing better. Not so much on the psychosocial, which is too bad, because to me, that's the most important point. Because people can have a healthy body, but a very low quality of life. They could have a healthy body and not have well-being. From my side, I'd like first to see a person develop well-being. We can have high levels of well-being even if we're ill, even if we're carrying around a chronic disease that we really can't fix. But the well-being comes from this how much spiritual life do we have? How much is our, say, psyche in tune with who we are and what we're doing? And that is of greater interest to me, frankly, is to cultivate well-being. If you can get the biological side in really good shape, super. Sometimes that's not easy for us to control for a host of reasons, but we can always control our psyche and how we manage our thoughts and our emotions.
So this leads me to think that so many doctors are talking about reducing your stress. Even a regular allopathic doctor will say you need to reduce your stress, but rarely do they really say how, other than maybe go for a walk or exercise. So is it possible that the study that you did might help doctors expand the suite of things that they offer for people to reduce stress? And did you include that as part of your study, that overall stress state?
Yeah, we did measure stress in the study as well. I mentioned earlier, depression and anxiety, which many people carry. And doctors will often say that you should get your anxiety under control because that's not good, or the depression or the poor sleep. Yeah, and all those improved. And as far as specific modalities, well, there are a lot of good things. You mentioned several times breathing exercises, and there's all kinds of different pranayams, and some are more suitable for this person and others for that person. Better not to just dive deep into some Kundalini Kriya. That often can turn out poorly, at least for novices. There's so much of this in the literature now, and I've seen more and more of it at scientific conferences, even things like the Society for Neuroscience, which is all about the brain and the nervous system. You see more and more research on meditation, looking at how meditation changes the brain and the amount of white and gray matter and so forth. And that's great. It's so exciting to see finally. And that, I believe, is, and I've, at least at the university where I am, is finding its way, let's say, into the patient, to the person's psyche and their lap, so to speak, as prescriptions.
Yeah, I think people are more likely to do something when it is a prescription. I think that there's been this idea that we don't take that part of it seriously. if your doctor doesn't give you a prescription, go meditate X amount of minutes, X times a day, then, we throw that out the door. If the doctor says go meditate, well, okay, well, that's woo-woo. What's it really going to do for me? How's it really going to change anything? Even if they say go on a diet, but they don't give you the prescription for that diet, most people disregard. Especially in the West, we're so used to the doctor telling us exactly what to do, doctor's orders. So how do you handle that part? How do we make a prescription for some of these integrated methods that people will actually follow?
Well, at the academic centers where these centers for integrative medicine exist, people are routinely given prescriptions. If they've already learned meditation, they're given a prescription to do it and to do it such and such frequently. If they don't know meditation, then they're offered to learn it because there are teachers right at these centers and they could learn how to do it. Some of the things we've done at our center, we were teaching people how to do gratitude journaling. And we gave them journals and we gave them a very specific prescription to keep the journal, which is basically to write in the journal almost every day of the week and to write down a couple of things. And that was amazing, that particular study. After 2 months of gratitude journaling, these were cardiac patients, and they had improved cardiac functioning. They had reductions in inflammatory biomarkers in their blood. I mean, major reductions, things you just would not see otherwise. And they started sleeping better and they had less depression and on and on. It's another example of all these different, often called positive psychology interventions, really can bring us along.
Now, you had mentioned something a little earlier. You said epigenetics, that you were getting some positive changes in the genes. Now, for the people, this is a global show, right? A lot of people haven't heard the term epigenetics, but ultimately, what this is that we actually have control over our genetic markers, what's on, what's off, and it's done through our state of being. Are we joyful? Are we in grief? So on and so forth. And what I'm hearing is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had the blood tests done, and the positive changes were in the markers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, they were, Bill. We saw a lot of changes in several hundred genes as a result of the study. And I want to add, too, that there are a lot of epigenetic studies out there now for different kinds of meditation, people learning pranayama practices, people learning yoga practices, and there have been some for diet. So our bodies are exquisitely responsive to our environment. We all know that in a variety of examples, but an environmental change, of course, includes things like, do I start meditating? Do I stop adhering to all these ruminating anxiety thoughts? Whenever we do changes like that, our body responds and changes too. And the way we showed it, and many studies show it, is you draw white blood cells from the blood, and then you characterize the genes on those cells. And you could find certain genes have been what are called upregulated. They're more expressed. And typically what we were seeing is these are genes you want upregulated and expressed. And then there are also genes that were downregulated. They were not as evident anymore after the intervention. And those are genes that you wouldn't, well, let's say, I could say you wouldn't want them there, but they were also evidence that the body was in a better state because those genes weren't needed to manage, say, chronic stress coming into the system because the person's psyche is managing them better or not attending to them in the same way. Back to ideas around rumination, chronic anxiety, chronic stress. You know, what one person calls stress, another person doesn't call stress. When I was young, starting out in the field of behavioral medicine, I was always corrected. It's not stress, it's a stressor. And the word stressor is to differentiate between, well, it might be a stress for that person, but not for that. So it's a stressor for me and not a stressor for you. And when we start managing our stressors, whatever which ones we have, then our bodies start responding. Our bodies are beautifully designed to go back to these healthy, more homeostatic states, if I may put it that way. The word salutogenesis is a term commonly used the last couple of decades, and that means our body's desire and capacity to always move to a center point of more health and well-being.
You know, what's amazing is how quickly these changes can happen in the body. In the work that Bill and I do, we use the BioWell machine to measure, as your wife, Tiffany Barsotti, is an expert at. And what we found is that when we got a trauma to stop running in the body on the nervous system, that the voltage in the body would jump considerably, sometimes 20%. We could see it, you know, right before and after, you know, an hour apart. And we know that when the voltage in the body is better, more healthy, then the body starts to heal almost immediately. So it's not surprising that you found that the genes were changing even quickly. What are some other things that you were surprised at that changed quickly in the study? Or did anything surprise you?
Well, yes, I'll tell you what surprised me, and I mentioned it earlier, and this was these domains of self-compassion just turning on, this movement towards the non-dual awareness. Honestly, I did not expect that. We gave these questionnaires more because we routinely give them in our studies, and some studies are designed more to examine that one domain over another. But when we started this Ayurvedic study, we put together a panel of questionnaires just based on what our center usually does when we do research with people. And lo and behold, self-compassion increased. We didn't talk about compassion. We didn't talk about gratitude. The gratitude study I mentioned was a completely different cohort of people. So those surprised me. And as I said earlier, I think the reason they go up is because this holistic approach just activates, let's say, the consciousness side of the person, maybe these more implicit inner soul attributes that are always there, ready to manifest and be expressed, but they're often covered up because we're just stuck living in the mind only, and we're ruminating and all these things that we've just been socialized to do and we think is normal.
Yeah.
But it's not normal. It's abnormal. And these traditional systems can help us say, wow, that's abnormal. I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to start doing something new.
Amazing. So we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to find out more about Dr. Mills and his work. And one of the ways you can do that is with his book, Science, Being, and Becoming: The Spiritual Life of a Scientist, in which the foreword is from Dr. Deepak Chopra, correct?
Yes, it is. I'm fortunate for that. And I'll add that Ken Wilber, many of your audience might know him, and he also wrote a special commentary. And I know you had Eben Alexander on your show in the past, and I asked Eben if he would write what's called a spotlight for my book. And I asked him to do that because much of the book is about the spiritual life of scientists and scientists who had different kinds of spiritual awakenings. And the question is, what do you do when you have an awakening? Do you move forward? Do you go back? And as you know, he had such an awakening through the near-death experience. And I asked him to write a piece for the book on how would he recommend physicians, scientists who have had such experiences to now navigate going forward the next day, the next month, the next year. He did a deep dive on that experientially, as you know, and he wrote a beautiful piece in the book as far as advice for people.
Isn't that wonderful, especially coming from a neurosurgeon out of Harvard? What a gift, because, it was verboten before, and here he is. He is a spearhead for the entire community of doctors to help them across this bridge.
You know what I think is funny about that, actually, is that scientists do not get out of random spiritual experiences. They happen to all of us. And just because you're a scientist does not mean you get out of that happening to you. So what's unique about it is a scientist who's willing to come forward and talk about it. I want to make sure too that our audience knows that Dr. Mills is offering something that is exclusively for you. It's at healandthrive.com, and it's the science of being becoming. Healandthrive.com, science being becoming. And what is that? What is that people can expect to find there?
Yeah, if I may hold this up, this is the book. This is the cover. And the idea here is you have a person who's just stepping out of having a metaphysical and a mystical experience, and they're emerging back into our world. And the gift is on the website, there's access to an excerpt of this book. It's about 30 some pages of the book, including the introduction and some other sections. So you could just read that for free, and hopefully you'll find it interesting and maybe inspiring.
Beautiful. Well, this has been a really fun conversation, super interesting and mind-opening, I think, for a lot of us, that a study like this was even done in the first place really shows where I think medicine is heading in the future, and that's amazing. So thank you for being with us, Dr. Mills. We appreciate it so much, and we hope to have you back again soon. Any last thoughts, Bill McKenna?
There's a big course coming up that they're having, and this is all about integrating the experience. If you have had a spiritual experience and you need help with integration, maybe you had an ayahuasca experience, healandthrive.com. You go to their website. They have a class coming up in the end of January, so be sure to check that out as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Mills. Thank you, Liz, and we will see you all again real soon.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Bill. Grateful that you had me on your show. I really enjoyed my time with you.
We'll talk again soon. Thanks, everybody. Be well and be safe. Thanks for being here with us on the New Life Perspective radio show. For more information or to find out more about the work that Bill and I do, please visit us at cognomovement.com or email us at info@cognomovement.com. See you again soon.